All right, we're here. We're going to have another conversation with Malorn for another episode of Real Talk. And on this one, we want to talk about Multicrew. Multicrew is one of the things that I feel like a lot of players in Star Citizen sign up for. They want to play it. They're interested in it. And then they're a bit disappointed to find out that Multicrew is not very good. Now, the topics that we're going to cover are going to be Multicrew and turret gunning, the Multicrew expectation of engineering, and pretty much the entire gambit of what Multicrew is, because it does mean different things to different people. So, starting off, I want to talk about specifically turrets, what turrets do or don't do, and the concept of 1 + 1 = 3. It's not a bad math equation. It's something that we use to describe essentially a force multiplication, and how important it is that if you're putting another player in, say, a turret of, like, let's say, a Scorpius or a Hurricane or anything for that matter, is the trade-off good enough for the player not having his own ship with his own firepower and his own maneuverability to put him in a single ship? Thus, 1 + 1 = 3. Because the idea here is that a ship with a gunner, say again, the Hurricane, needs to be worth more, not equal to a single-seat ship.
Yeah, that's a great capture of that concept. I like to give a good example of that as the original Planetside. You had the main tanks were a good example. You had a lightning one-man tank that was a pretty good killing machine, especially if you knew how to use it. But then you also had these two-man crew tanks that had a dedicated driver, a dedicated gunner, and, well, mostly. And one of those tanks that was crewed was definitely better than having 3 individual lightnings running around. And that's kind of where the 1 + 1 = 3 comes from, because you have to make it worthwhile. You have to make it worth the cost and risk of putting 2 people in a single vehicle. You kill that vehicle, you take out 2 people. And they have to be a sufficient force multiplier. It has to be worth the firepower and the durability of being in that multi-crew vehicle versus being in individual vehicles.
Star Citizen right now doesn't really have anything like that. We used to have the Hurricane and the Scorpius, but for simplicity's sake right now we're just going to say the Hurricane from here on out. And the Hurricane used to be able to hold its own against numerous light fighters. A lot of that was due to the game never really being about 2v1s or 3v1s, because the old flight model meant that it was really just a series of 1v1s. So it was a little bit skewed in that. But back then the turrets were very powerful. They had a very strong auto-aim, and it was very easy for them to hit and track their targets. Now the turrets are pretty bad, and that's a separate balance issue. And the balance issue with turrets, I'm sure, will be addressed. I know Yogi's talked about that. But I'm afraid that the concept here is being lost. That they're not understanding, or maybe players in general aren't understanding, that having a gunner needs to mean something. It needs to mean that you're taking this player, like I said earlier, he's sacrificing his own ship. That sacrifice has to be worth something. And nobody's really talking about that or understanding that. They think that just because the Hurricane is 1 ship, it should also be worth 1 ship. You can't really give it a mathematical equation of, oh, well, it's worth 2 of these or 3 of these. That's a little too complicated, and it doesn't need to be that nuanced or specific. It's about the general methodology and the concept around this equation for balance. So if I want to get a Hurricane in my ideal world, this thing's going to be able to take on maybe 3 Gladiuses at once. It's going to have the firepower and the survivability and the maneuverability to at least keep up with them, sort of, right? But if they decide to take that fight, it's going to knock 3 of them out. Therefore, this ship on its own is going to be worth 3 other ships. Now, that's going to get a bit muddied if you start getting into heavies and mediums, but for now, we're just going to keep that concept very simple. Right now, that's not the case. Right now, you are better off always bringing more ships. And another reason why it's worth bringing more ships is that the TTK right now with the cannons, and again, this is a balance issue, it's incredibly fast. We're talking ships are popping in under 20, maybe 30 seconds with good accuracy. So these things are dying really fast. And if it's in a team fight, not an isolated 1v1 environment, they're dying even faster. And because of that high time to kill, or rather fast time to kill, because of that fast time to kill, it's not a high TTK, it's a fast TTK, the fights don't last long enough for these multi-crew ships, for this Hurricane to really shine. So you're better off bringing another ship to spread that damage out across 3 other ships.
Yeah, it's definitely has a durability aspect to it as well, where the ship needs to be noticeably more durable than a single ship that is even remotely comparable. And another concept that I think is very important is the accessibility factor of these kind of multi-crew ships. Not everyone's going to be an ace pilot. Not everyone needs to be an ace pilot to enjoy the game or be good at the game. Some people can have great fun being a gunner or the engineering gameplay that they talk about, which is another interesting topic to go into.
So before we go into the engineering, I do definitely want to touch on this and kind of iron it out a bit more. As you said, something that's very important is not everybody not only has to be an ace pilot or a good pilot, but not everybody wants to be a good pilot. There are a lot of players out there where there is an immense amount of pressure to perform, and they just simply don't want to, or they're not capable of it. So by allowing you to put, say, a mediocre, average, or even good gunner in the gunner seat of an ace pilot, you now allow that player to enjoy the game as well as the ace pilot. It's a very good accessibility tool for new players. It's just a very good accessibility tool, perhaps, for players who they're not really interested in being a fighter pilot. Maybe they're a cargo player, maybe they're an industrial player, or maybe they're primarily a ground-focused infantry player, and they're going to be pressed into a role where aerospace support might be needed. They might have to be in a space combat role. They're not going to want to pull their own Gladius and on the fly learn how to use it. That's not what they're there for. So they need to have that viable option of being in that gunner seat. Also, I'm of the opinion that teamwork in general just makes everything more fun. It doesn't matter what it is. Some of my fondest memories from playing Halo was not actually gunning on the Warthog, but driving the Warthog while other people gunned. Another one of my most fond memories also came from Planetside 1, where I loved to drive the Marauder. And I would drive my gunner around, and I would circle the base or get in there and weave between infantry. Very similar concept to the Warthog. It would gun infantry down, do hit-and-run strikes. It was a lot of fun. It was a good force multiplier. And then probably my favorite non-organized gameplay of Planetside 2 was actually the Harasser in that game, which was the same concept, driver-gunner. The driver sacrificed all of his offensive power to put it in the hands of the gunner, and the gunner had a tremendous amount of magnified force projection. And that's really what I think a lot of players are looking for. And currently in Star Citizen, there is nothing like that for turret gunners at all in any way, shape, or form. Not even ground vehicles. Because most players, it seems like in this game, and I'll let you talk in a moment here, but I really want to touch on this. There are two particular ships that stand out to me as the biggest culprit of this and one of the worst offenders for this. It actually shows the mindset the players have, certain players, is we have the Constellation Andromeda and we have the Drake Corsair. Both of these ships are billed and marketed as multi-crew ships where they have gunners, but nobody ever actually takes gunners in these because they're worthless. But let's say gunners were not worthless. Can you tell me why I would ever want to bring, say, a Constellation and two gunners, right? So we have a one Connie and two gunners versus 3 individual constellations. And that's something that immediately right now I can't think of a solution to. But you're going to find that players who want to play to win, even if turret gunning was made better, they're still going to gravitate towards those bigger ships with more forward firepower, and are not going to throw players into those turrets.
I have a very similar fond memories of the Marauder in the beta of Planetside. That was great, and that was very fun. I was a driver, and I loved watching and enabling my gunners to get kills. And then I went into retail at Planetside, and I drove a tank. I drove a Vanguard most of the time, and I hardly got any kills other than running people over. But I got great enjoyment and a lot of pride in being a good driver of a tank, even though I never got to enjoy the gunnery aspect of it. It was something to specialize in that wasn't necessarily a combat, skill or aiming related skill. It was more of a support skill. And similarly, my first experience in Star Citizen, really enjoying this game, is when he took me out in a Scorpius and a Hurricane, and I got to gun and just enjoy the game when I really didn't know how to fly. So as a new player, that was a fantastic experience. That's a great thing to get in and step in and do. And that's what caused me to purchase a Scorpius is pretty much the same thing. I want to be able to take my friends who might be interested in the game and take them out and show them a good time in a Scorpius and let them gun and have fun. And that's a kind of a, just like at its core gameplay loop, two people running around together, just hopping in a two-crew vehicle and enjoying the game with a multi-crew. And I think a lot of people really want this experience, and all you have to do to see that is look at the excitement about a lot of these ships and a lot of these stuff that people want. People aren't like, oh man, I can't wait to go out and fly a Gladius. Oh hell no. They're like, I want that Ironclad. I want the Polaris. I want the Perseus. They want those. They want the multi-crew ships. That's what they want. They they know they're not going to be some ace pilot in those things. They want the big ship scale experience. That's something that no other game can really offer. It's the Star Citizen niche. Anybody can go fly a single fighter pilot in a lot of games if you want to do that. But the big multi-crew stuff, that's really only going to be in Star Citizen, and it's a shame that it's just really, they're not really hitting that niche that they have. They're not really I don't think they really understand even that's really the draw that people have, and they need to make this stuff a lot more appealing, and people are going to be both even more excited to put down money on those ships, and they're going to have more enjoyment and satisfaction with their purchase.
I'm glad you brought up the experience with Scorpius, because back when these were viable ways to play the game, every new player that picked up the game, I immediately took them into my Hurricane or my Scorpius, and it was always just the most fun they had. I think that there is a very big misconception that it's a less skilled thing, that you have players who are not good pilots gunning. I disagree. I think that there is a great deal amount of skill in making sure that your gunner has a good angle. And there's also a sense of satisfaction, at least for the pilot, in my experience anyway, when you get a good solution that your gunner can use to actually reach out and hit targets. You don't really have that right now in the game. You haven't had that for quite a while. And it's something that I don't think they're going to be able to, without some drastic changes, really address, because like I said earlier, touching on it, you've got the Corsair and you have the Connie, right? The ships of Oath class. How are you going to balance that? What are you going to do to make those less oppressive? What are you going to do to incentivize me to be in that heavy fighter? What are you going to do to incentivize me not to pull to, say, F8 Lightnings and instead pull one Hurricane or Scorpius with a gunner? And I don't see a solution for that right now. I don't, off the top of my head, I simply can't. And I can only speak to the actual concept here of it's great for new players, it's good training, it's a good first experience, it's a way for veterans to bring out noobs, it's a way for noobs to excel and get something out of the game, and also just in general encourage them to play more and buy more. Because it worked on me, it worked on Malorn here, it worked on a lot of guys in our org. And we all feel like we've lost a lot when we lost access to an effective Hurricane and an effective Scorpius. It's simply not as much fun as it was. Yeah, we've all sucked it up and we've started doing a lot more pilot training and learning how to fly, but I don't think a lot of players are going to do that. I think a lot of players are very dead set on, yeah, I want to be that gunner, I want to be in that role, I want to be in that Warthog role, Warthog being the Halo one, and they just can't get that anymore. But that's mostly what I've got to say about the multi-crew in that respect. But I'd like to get maybe one more bit of feedback from you on that before we kind of jump into the big topic of big ships and multi-crew, which is going to probably take the majority of this conversation.
Yeah, I agree with really everything you just said there. There's a huge accessibility factor. And another ship that I think is a really big missed opportunity is the Redeemer, which looks like a perfect ship. It really looks like a perfect ship if I've got like 2 to 4 people. Like we got a small group, like your typical MMO sized party. You got a few friends. We're gonna go out. We're gonna party in a Redeemer. You got a couple gunners, maybe even 3. And that ship it's got the snacks. Love the snacks. But it also has beds and places for weapons storage and stuff. It seems like a ship that you could just take and just go plow through, just blow up a bunch of stuff in the air and have fun, and then turn around and just blow up ground defenses, land, go out and ground pound as infantry, and then come back to your ship, take off, and go do another mission. It seems like a perfect sort of ship for that purpose, and it's just I never see a need to ever even try, because it's just better for me just to grab a Corsair. Like my 2 or 3 other buddies grab a Corsair too. Why not? You'll get way more firepower and way more durability out of running like 3 Corsairs or 4 Corsairs, and it's really sad. I really hope that they come back to this concept, because it's the perfect sort of thing that you could spend an afternoon or a play session with some friends.
The Redeemer is a perfect example of this, and I actually forgot about it, and I'm glad you brought it up. CIG's also forgot about it too, I think. There's one particular user who makes comments on my channel for about a year now, and anytime the Redeemer comes up, they always talk about the Redeemer. They're absolutely in love with it, so maybe they're listening to this too. They'll know who they are. This ship has a great appeal to people, and on paper, you're looking at 2 size 5 guns on the top, 2 size 5 guns on the bottom, and some little turrets on the side. I don't know off the top of my head. I think you've got 4 jump seats in it. So it really looks like this ultimate combat-focused multi-crew ship. But if you break down the math here, you've got the 2 size 5s, and to each one of those requires 1 gunner. So we have 1 gunner, we have 2 gunners, we have a pilot, bare minimum. That's 3 players. That gives you access to 4 size 5s, and the pilot has some crappy remote. I think they're size 3s, like maybe 2. I don't know the specifics. But right there, let's just talk about the size 5. That's 4 size 5s between 2 players. So it's 2 each. Let's go to the Corsair and the Connie. That is 4 size 5s with 1 player. There is, again, 0 reason to bring the Redeemer. And this is not just a Redeemer issue. It's a concept issue. It's an entire failing as a concept. So, what do we do to make these ships appealing to the point where we want to put players in them? It's a durability issue. We've acknowledged that, because it's not just a firepower. It's very easy to point to firepower, and that's definitely part of it. But it's also a durability issue. I know it has an extra size 3, but an extra size 3 for 3 people is not going to make up for 3 Corsairs or 3 Connie Andromedas firing at it. It's simply not going to. So, we're now moving into the multi-crew segment. Durability. How are we going to do that? Well, right now, if you guys are not familiar, maybe Malorn's not familiar, but they did a test where they did multi-crew, I think it was engineering gameplay / multi-crew test on AC. It wasn't very popular because, quite frankly, it wasn't very good. To bring you guys up to speed, you had to crew an A2, and you were being attacked by Gladiuses, and you had to put out fires, you had to change fuse switches around, you had to mess around with a panel, and you basically just had to survive and do all this stuff. Meanwhile, the Gladiuses are just circling the A2 and shooting you the entire time. Now, on the first iteration, the A2 just did not have enough HP to survive, so the A2 just died. There was nothing you could do, so it would just die before you got any real multi-crew gameplay out of it. So then they buffed that particular A2 for that particular game mode to an absurd amount of HP just to extend its life so that players could try and do the multi-crew stuff. So when they finally did that, it turned out that the multi-crew, to compete with 1 Gladius just messing you up, players who would be in gunner seats had to get out of their gunner seats and look for fuses and switches and replace them. They then had to go and put out fires. They then had to go use a repair tool to repair the components. They had to do all this stuff. Meanwhile, the Gladius just kept shooting at it. I didn't see the appeal of this test. I didn't see the fun of this test. And I also didn't see what would compel me to ever be in an A2 that has to do all this micro work versus a Gladius or numerous Gladiuses, numerous single-seat ships, all right? Let's just say single-seaters, that can just not worry about any of that and just wither away at the A2 until it's dead.
Yeah, you're facing the same sort of math situation that I can. When we talked about 1 + 1 = 3 earlier, I mean, we're just talking about straight firepower advantage. When you want to introduce something like a co-pilot who doesn't have a gun, or an engineer whose job in the ship basically is not to do anything other than a little mini game in the back, it's hard enough just to justify the rather lackluster turrets on these ships to even bother manning them. And it's now you don't even have that. You don't even have a turret to man. You've got this other engineering gameplay thing going on, and I really don't see how that's ever going to be worthwhile for anyone to bother doing, unless it tremendously buffs the durability of the ship. Like if you have an engineer, like your ship is super, super durable. And even then, it doesn't seem like it's particularly fun to be the guy doing that, playing this little mini game instead of, I don't know, managing the power triangle on the ship or doing something else. Like doing something that boosts the capacitor on the ship so the gunners can shoot more, doing something that boosts the shields so it protects more. You know, you got to have a very significant durability buff by having someone who's dedicated to doing those sorts of things, and a firepower, because you still have to compensate for the opportunity cost of not having a gunner. So, I mean, they can't do two things at once. They can't be shooting and managing, you know, the ship and whatever little mini game is going on. And for that to even remotely work, you got to have very, very high durability on ships to even just have the time to get out of a seat and go to the ship. Some of these ships are huge. Like an A2, I mean, it could take you 30 seconds to get from one side of that ship to the other to go mess with a component. The whole time you're in combat, you're being shot at, you're flying around. There's probably some G forces throwing you around the ship. I mean, that doesn't sound like particularly fun gameplay. Probably getting like injuries on yourself while you're trying to do this because the ship is in combat. Yeah, the idea is interesting, but the to balance that seems like just a nightmare.
That can kind of sum up Star Citizen as a whole. A lot of great ideas, and execution is always typically pretty lackluster. When you have a lot of players like that in a ship, you're introducing a micro tax. They have to all be doing something. The only game, now I've never played it, but I'm familiar with how it works. Sea of Thieves had a pretty good crew-based combat system. Repairing a ship in that game, it was all multi-crew. Repairing a ship in that game was relatively simple. You would just go and get some wood and plug a hole. You would shovel water out. You'd put out fires. You would cook food for buffs. You would repair sails. You would shoot cannons. And you would repel boarders. All that stuff actually extended the life of the ship by quite a bit. It was super intuitive. It wasn't very complicated or hard. It was nothing really unnecessary about it. And Star Citizen is kind of close to that with its current system, sorta. But in typical Star Citizen fashion, it's just made it more complicated for no real gain or benefit. If you could repair this ship, like let's say you're taking serious damage, but restore the quote-unquote HP of a ship, or restore something to full or near full and increase the longevity of the fight, essentially with a proper crew, making these ships almost, and I'm a bit remiss to use the word, but I'm going to anyway, a bit indestructible and more towards boarding or excessive firepower destroying them, you might get a bit more of the gameplay out of this. You know, a bad example, that might be a bad example, it's definitely not as good as the example from Sea of Thieves, but something like Squad or something like even Hell Let Loose or even Battlefield, right, where you can repair a tank. And these things are in operation, they're a force multiplier, they can't be easily taken out, and repairing them is important, but an overall simple task. It keeps them in the game. I'm not advocating for just using a wrench on a spot of just randomness and full HP. That's not what I'm saying, but you need something to increase the longevity and durability of that ship to justify putting like 8 or 9 people in it. Because I think an A2, which is the example given, you're looking at like a crew of 6 or 7 or maybe 8. I don't know. That's a lot of people in one ship. And that's a lot of people that could be in their own ships. So you have to mathematically and gameplay-wise justify that. Because if there's a bunch of guys in that ship, you know, what's stopping me? Why would I ever subject myself to that when I could just effortlessly destroy them over time with a handful of, say, Ares Infernos or Eclipses or something like that, right? There's really nothing causing me to want to get in that ship, and I don't see anything even in the near future or even distant future that would make me want to be in those ships as opposed to just swarming them with their counters at all. I just don't see it.
Yeah, I think of something as simple as like a Corsair with a pilot and maybe a gunner or two and an engineer, someone running around actually managing the Corsair. If you think about something just simple as that, you basically have a difficult sell to justify 2 of those crew members to even be useful, especially for something that is relatively easy to blow up. The more I thought about this, the more I sort of think that if you have an engineer in a ship, they should basically probably triple the durability of the ship, if not more so, if you have someone just dedicated to doing that job, and also have a significant firepower increase. And as far as like ship class goes, I think this is like a really probably a difficult topic to tie into this, but the way that the ship classes are balanced, like when you have something like a little Gladius can just fly around some big ship like a Hammerhead and just pepper it down until it's dead. Like when you have that many people in a not in the Gladius, but when you have that many people in a Hammerhead, and the Hammerhead's purpose is to do something like kill fighters, and you have one fighter that can just outmaneuver the Hammerhead no problem and eventually kill it. I think the solution is relatively simple there. It's like the fighter doesn't have the firepower to kill the Hammerhead. Either the Hammerhead's shields will regenerate faster than the lone fighter can possibly kill it, or it just has a massive effective hit point difference. And the Hammerhead's another one that I think is a classic example of a very failed ship. Like its purpose is kind of a picket ship, a destroyer of sorts that's meant to ward off the small ships, and it does not do that job even remotely well in the slightest. And it needs to be a lot more durable. It needs to have a lot more firepower on it, and you need to be worthwhile to put that many people in that little, kill pinata. And engineering is one of the yet another person to add into the pile, and if it's going to be compelling gameplay, it's really got to be very significant when an engineer is present. And I'm a big fan of letting the engineer actually manage the power triangle, or making the power triangle far more impactful when an engineer is present. Like the engineer can generate more power for the ship. The engineer can get you more capacitor for your guns. The engineer can get you more power for your shields, more strength for your shields. You can be like Scotty from Star Trek, giving it all she's got. Just get 110% more out of it and turn a dire situation into, a win, because you've got an engineer back there who's pushing the ship to its limits. And yeah, I think that the only real way to make that work is if you have an engineer present, your ship is just far more durable. But then that just leads into other weird problems where sometimes you're going to come across a Corsair that has an engineer and it's going to be a very tough nut to crack. And other times you're going to come across a Corsair that doesn't have an engineer and it's going to be a free kill. This is a tough problem. And I think that Star Citizen needs to sort out how it wants to handle its ship classes and how they interact with each other. And I really do think there should be orders of magnitude difference between a small ship and a medium ship and a large ship in terms of durability and firepower capability.
People aren't going to like the suggestions that I'm going to give, and these are immediately right off the top of my head, right? So there's not a whole lot of thought into these. But a great way to do that, very simply, is to give the engineering role something more complex than the power triangle we have now. And I imagine it would be more complex, but for lack of better words, I can hear the groans, but think of them like cooldowns, right? You can overclock. Let's call it overclocking. You can overclock the guns on the ship, and they fire faster, they recharge faster, they have better accuracy, better range, better everything. Just overall, across the board, better everything. But it has a cooldown. You can only overcharge so many times, right? Same thing with shield. You can do a shield overcharge that massively buffs the shields to regenerate faster, to absorb more damage, do a bunch of stuff like that. Same with the engines. You can maximize and overcharge the engines so that everything is, quote unquote, giving it all she's got. Add this like more interesting cooldown based gameplay, or quote unquote cooldown based. I don't want any gripes about that, but you guys, this is all just a concept. We're just spitballing here, but introduce that more interesting, in-depth gameplay. That the engineer, he's got something more to do than, I'm going to slide it left to right, up and down, something more than that. And say, okay, the guys at the top, the gunner seats, or the pilot, or the captain, whoever it may be, is like, hey, we're fighting like 5 ships here. We don't need extra firepower to kill these, but we definitely need some more shields to outlast them. So the engineer hears that, and he decides to, boom, he buffs it up, and he punches that, that cooldown, and those shields are way more powerful. Take that concept, adapt that. Same for firepower, same for shields. Whatever the team communicates that they need, the engineer needs to be able to provide. And I am all in favor, and nobody's going to like this, but I am all in favor of giving a crewed ship, a proper crewed ship, immense amounts of firepower and durability and maneuverability advantages over a single crewed ship, meaning a ship like a Corsair with a crew versus a Corsair without a crew. I know a lot of people might not have friends. I understand that. There might be other solutions to that with NPC crews or Blaze or whatever it may be. But in general, I would hate to see the meta become just individuals flying these big ships because they have control of everything from the power to the guns to the steering. You name it, they got it. I would want to see more than that. That's going to be a big problem, too, when we have ships like the Eclipse, right? Or let's ignore the Eclipse. It's got 3 torpedoes. Let's say the new one, not the new one, but the Retaliator. Just got gold standard, right? I think that thing's got a crew of 6 on paper, maybe, and has 6 size 9 torpedoes. I think it's like a crew of 6, but let's just say crew of 6 for conversation purposes. So that's a pilot plus 5 gunners. Why would I ever want those 5 gunners? The main selling point of that ship is a torpedo bay. So I would rather just have 6 total Retaliators with 9 torpedoes each, overwhelming a Hammerhead, overwhelming even a Polaris or something else, because I have all that anti-capital or anti-big ship firepower in that one package. I don't need a crew to make those work. So, and that's what players are going to do. They're not going to roleplay and LARP and say, okay, we want a full crew for my tally. All right, this one's full. Let's go get another one and fill it up. They're not going to do that. They're just going to bring as many Retaliators as possible to fire as many big torpedoes as possible to overwhelm these cruise ships. So every time you come up with a solution to make these bigger multi-crew ships better, there is already in-game right now a counter to that solution. It's a never-ending balance struggle. And if you think players aren't going to do that, you're absolutely wrong. They're going to do whatever's the most effective thing to win by taking the path of least resistance that requires the least amount of coordination and the least amount of teamwork to get the most amount of effect.
I really like the cooldown idea. I think that's a great way to make the gameplay both more engaging and also reward team play. Because now you have pilot, gunner, engineer coordination, where hey, we need shields. The pilot can relay to the engineer, here's what we need, and the engineer can make it happen. And maybe there's other interesting things they can do, like maybe to incentivize, like your Retaliator example, maybe they can fabricate or manufacture extra guns from raw materials in the cargo hold, or not extra guns, but like extra torpedoes, by going into the cargo hold and taking some raw materials there and doing something to replenish their ammunition supply. So there's also a value to having them for even limited ammo ships. And you're absolutely correct that people are just going to do what is the most effective. It's one of the reasons I think that you just kind of have to have a difference of durability, whether or not an engineer or gunners are present in a ship, simply because if you don't, people are just going to spam the one person in that ship, and they're going to get the most value out of that. And if you make a multi-crew intended ship super durable, but has decent firepower, but it's a flying brick, people are just going to spam the bricks and just use the raw EHP to muscle their way through to victory. And that's not going to be fun for anybody. It's not going to be an interesting meta to play against, and I don't think people are going to really enjoy that. So it's a tough balancing act on making these ships worthwhile to multi-crew, but also not something you can just spam with fewer crew members. So you really need to make every crew member added something significant to the ship to make it worthwhile. Otherwise, people are just going to find the magic number of crew members, and that's the crew members they will use. They won't fully crew the A2. Like, no way. They'll just put the bare minimum necessary to get the firepower on point, and they'll put the bare minimum number of gunners necessary to be worthwhile, and then they'll just fly multiple A2s with that minimum configuration of effectiveness. And that's going to be the same thing with like the Retaliators, and really every ship that is multi-crew is going to be minimum crew so you can field more of them. So the only really way you're going to, add value there is to add significant value with every additional crew member. And we saw an example of this in the original Planetside, and even with Planetside 2 as well, where you had like the Prowler tank, which was a 3-person crew, or the Marauder we talked about earlier. It was actually a 3-person vehicle. You had the driver, the gunner on the like the mortar for the Marauder, and then you had this little much weaker front gun third person. That third gun was worthless and didn't really bring anything, and you were much better off having like two Marauders with two people than or three Marauders with two people in them than trying to run two Marauders fully crewed. And I think that same thing's going to happen in Star Citizen. Like you won't see like fully crewed Hammerheads unless there's something valuable that happens with each additional crew member. Like it can't just be the added firepower that's insufficient to justify the person. And I don't really have a good solution there other than I don't know, just make the ship scale in power with the number of people that are in it. And it's hard to do that just by simply having more guns unless those guns are really, really good. Like that, I guess if you make the guns good enough that it could be worth it. But I don't envy their balance approach there, but they definitely have to really think about this in a big way, because what's really drawing people to this game is this multi-crew. And people aren't excited about these ships and excited about the game because they want to just go fly one-man fighters the whole time. Like they don't. They want the multi-crew. They want the teamwork. They want the grand scale. They want the universe. They don't want some little space battle. Nobody cares about your little space fight. They want something big. They want big ships fighting other big ships. They want, grand, progression, big things that happen over time, empires that you build, big space battles with big ships. And the last thing I would add is when it comes to like the multi-crew, it's another huge accessibility point for a big ship because, to pilot a big ship, it really doesn't take a lot of skill. I think it's not a fast maneuverable ship that you need to learn all the ins and outs of dogfighting to fly well. It's a big flying brick. So, the advantage of that is the big flying brick is pretty easy to fly, which means anybody can do it. Anyone can pick that up and have fun and feel like they're contributing meaningfully. And that's why I like the concept of the engineering gameplay, because again, it's not a piloting skill, it's not a gunnery skill, but you're still contributing and bringing something good to the team. And I think it's really important to have that. And not to crap on the fighters. I mean, they still have their role, and I think the people that are really into the fighters are going to stay into the fighters, and they're going to keep using the fighters even when there's big ships. And even if those big ships might have a lot of firepower, they're still going to be in the fighters because that's what they're good at and that's what they enjoy.
What you described there is just min-maxing, right? You put the minimum amount of effort in to get the maximum amount of effect. Everybody does it in every game. It's nothing new. It happens in SC now. It's going to happen in SC in the future. And we're sitting here, we're talking about engineering gameplay, engineers, and turrets. But there's another seat in the game. There's two other seats. One's the co-pilot, which who knows what the co-pilot's going to do. And then we got another seat that a lot of ships have, which is the captain's seat. What is the co-pilot and the captain going to do? We've got all this stuff ironed out for the engineer, and obviously the turret gunners, they shoot. Now we have the pilot and we have the captain. So the captain, what is he going to add? Is he going to be able to see everything on the ship? Is he going to be able to put waypoints? Is he going to have more information to relay? Is he going to have something to justify him being in the captain's seat? What is going to be my motivation, my drive to fill that seat? What's the co-pilot going to do? Is he just going to take over when the pilot leaves the seat? Well, what? There's so many issues. It's like these ships were made, and there was no thought that went into, well, how this is going to translate to gameplay. Because I think the Hammerhead has a captain's seat, at least has a captain's quarters. I know like the 890 Jump has a captain's seat. I know some of these just have captain's areas. I know the new Idris has a captain's seat. Is it just there to sit in to look cool for RP events? If so, that's kind of lame. Because in reality, the quote-unquote captain in the game now is the guy who flies the ship. He steers it around. So what's the captain's seat going to do? Is it going to do anything? Does it have to do anything? These are all these questions that keep coming up. The more you think about Multicrew, the more you realize how undeveloped and unrefined and just completely unexplored it is. And outside of stat increases or just performance increases based on the number of seats you're filling, I just do not ever see these things being good. I just don't ever see it. And when I say being good, I mean in a competitive environment. And I don't mean competitive like esports. I mean competitive as in winning fights consecutively when it matters. People seem to think competitive means AC or esports or some other nonsense. No, I'm a very competitive person, just not in that field. But when it comes to winning and winning big, that's where my competition is. And that's where a lot of people's competition is going to be too. And they're going to ask and say, well, why would we want a captain in here? Why would we want a co-pilot in here? We don't. That's that's two extra bodies to fill out and min-max to another ship. So yeah, I don't envy them either. I have no real solutions for these problems. The simple dirty ones are stat increases. They're just overall survivability and performance increases. But if that's not the route they're going to go, then I can't see any other way to see them filling it out in these seats. And I think this ultimately comes down to just a design mistake early on that just happened. These ships were made, I've always said that these ships were made to be sold. They weren't made to be played. The Hammerhead, again, going back to the Hammerhead, it's such a good example of an absolutely atrocious joke of a ship that somebody got, they sat down, they wrote out the description, they wrote out the lore, they wrote out the things like, oh yeah, in my head, this is going to be really good at this job. And the turrets were just bolted on to look like a Hammerhead. They were put in places that make no sense. And another pet peeve of mine, friggin' tail guns in space never make sense, and they still don't make sense. And the Hammerhead's got a tail gun, and that's the gunner that never gets any action. When you are stupid enough to fill up the Hammerhead, that's the one seat that gets no action. So these design mistakes have happened long ago, and the solution, I don't think it's feasible to redesign these ships. I don't think it's ever going to happen. I think it's just the way they're designed is too complicated. I don't see it happening. Changing turret traversals to be unrealistic is a solution. There's a lot of just very ugly solutions to these problems, and they are ugly. They're not high fidelity. Making the Hammerhead turrets spin in ways that they don't make sense is really the only way to fix the current Hammerhead and a lot of ships that suffer the same problems that it has. It's the only way to fix it, because they need to traverse in these areas. They need to be able to cover these areas. I don't want to go too much back into the turret topic, but you kind of see here that the more you start to think about it, it's like a blooming onion of bad design. And that's what a lot of these ships are. And you peel away one layer and you think, oh, there must be no more here. There's another layer of bad design and bad decisions. And most of those decisions and bad designs are from the big ships. And we've had, at least from what others SC historians have told me, we've had 10 years or more, maybe 10 or 8, of just single-seat ships. And that's all that ever gets refined, released, tested. That's all that people PvP. And that's a shame, because that's still not even figured out. But here we are, we're talking about Multicrew 10 plus years later. We don't have any Multicrew, and what we do have absolutely sucks. And I want to definitely segue into this, but it also seems like every time there's a new feature that comes out, like let's look at precision targeting and even sub-targeting. I did a video on precision targeting mode and sub-targeting. These things are exclusively useful against big ships. The only time you're going to get a use out of precision mode and sub-targeting mode is when you're targeting a big, slow target to hit components on that big, slow target. So when you're in those ships, you are absolutely content for those smaller ships. That's how I view all these new features.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely correct. They're content. Like you're made to be the sucker. You're the entertainment for the small ships right now. And it's very sad, because it's not really what the players want, and it's not what's going to make for a fun and compelling game in the long run. I do hope that changes. Regarding some of the turret things, one of the things that I think has been a good step in the right direction has been the remote turrets and being able to hot swap very quickly between remote turrets, because then you can have a lot of turrets around a ship, and in any given fight, typically, there's only going to be a couple turrets. They're going to have good firing angles on the target, depending on where it is. And if you have things like rear turrets facing backwards, or tail guns and that sort of thing, for people who, for those situations where, we need a turret coverage back here because someone might be on the tail of the ship, it's like, just make that a remote turret and have one person operating several different guns that cover most of the ship, and they're your defensive gunner for that role. And then now you have better turret coverage. You don't have to really go crazy with the ship, and you're also being a little more crew efficient, where you have one person who has good coverage instead of one person who's got kind of okay coverage on the ship, and then they can't really do anything unless you know, realign the ship in a certain way, or the opponents that are fighting you are just getting under that ship's guns, so you can't ever bring those to bear. The remote turrets are a great solution to that, but there's still a lot of ships that have like the physical turret, and that's just horrible. And I don't see why in 900 years into the future, however long this is, I don't see why you would ever not have remote turrets for everything at that point, or have some of these turrets, when they're not being operated, have some automation to them, or something. But I mean, I really like I really like the remote turret as the solution, and being able to quickly and easily hop between them without having to physically get up out of a chair and go sit over in a different chair. And with respect to like something like the captain's chair, I really enjoyed Invictus Week. It was the first one I'd actually had significant time in. And I walked over and I was all over that Idris walking around. That thing is both amazing, but also at the same time, like, wow, does this have a lot of useless looking places in this thing? I hope that they're interesting gameplay at some point, but when I went to the bridge of that thing, it had this, probably for Squadron 42, show or whatever, but it had a big, what looked like a map in the middle. And I could see, like, I was just looking at that thing, like, this would be like this great little place that if this had like a tactical map of the immediate area, all the other ships, ways to call targets, ways to see and coordinate people. That's basically what a commander does in like Star Trek and whatnot. And they're the captain, they're not flying the ship. They don't care. They're just telling people what to do. Target this thing, target that thing, fire, And I can see something like a larger capital ship bringing value for a captain seat in the terms of being a commander, being a coordinator, helping and getting the tools to manage a fight. And I think that's really the only thing that makes sense for that role, because obviously you're not piloting the ship and you're not firing the weapons. What else are you going to do in that chair? You're going to coordinate. You're going to sit in that chair and manage. And I think some of the things I did back in Planetside when I was strategically managing a battle that's going on with a couple hundred people, you pretty much need someone dedicated to that role, or a couple people dedicated to managing those situations. And that's where a ship like an Idris makes sense. You got Idris is a ship, you can launch other fighters from it. You've got a pretty large crew. It's got some firepower, but it also has a good command and control center where you could manage to coordinate a fight. And then you have things like the boarding ships suddenly have value, because now you could try to actually go kill the commander in their spot and like decapitate the other fleet if you can do those sorts of things. And regarding like the co-pilot, I'm not really sure what a co-pilot would do. Probably is just as useless as a co-pilot in real life. It sits there and does nothing most of the time until, the captain has to take a piss. Okay, captain's taking a piss. Co-pilot's going to take over. Oh, wait, we're on autopilot anyway. Okay. It's just like, it's an interesting concept, and really does look like someone designed the ship to be sold or to be viewed or to look functional in a realistic sense and not be practical in a gaming sense. But, maybe the co-pilot could, have an engineer similar functionality for a large capital ship where they're doing, the boosts and the other sorts of things in a large ship where a smaller ship you'd actually be out and about in the ship. Whereas, large ships are way too big to be doing that all over the place. But maybe the co-pilot can manage that, or coordinate with the pilot on when they get different buffs and effects, or maybe like the captain is to a battle, the co-pilot might be to the ship. Like a large Idris ship, you got a lot of people running around. Maybe they're coordinating and managing where those people need to be. Like, hey, we've got boarders coming in. Okay, the co-pilot can go manage the boarding where your soldiers on the ship go to intercept, or I guess, I don't know. But even then, like, why would you have people just sitting around your ship waiting for boarders? No one's going to do that. It's it's a tough problem, but I do think there's a niche for at least a captain's role for coordination, but they really have to provide you tools to better manage a fight in order for that to really have value.
Tools will definitely be something that we would talk about in another video, especially with the UI. I learned how atrocious the UI is just doing Xenothreat and doing some organized PvP against other groups in Xenothreat. It really just, all this comes down to, and this is my biggest fear, is yes, it looks amazing. Yes, it sounds amazing that we have this stuff. But the game itself and how games work in general, it doesn't lend itself to this type of design. There's a reason why other games don't do it. And you can go, oh, well, this is not like every other game. No, it's not like every other game. But it shouldn't be differentiating itself from every other game by doing stupid crap that most players don't really care about and don't add anything to the game. It should be differentiating itself from other games based on scope and scale and universe and gameplay, not because it has a captain's chair and a bathroom. That's the only thing that that's the only differentiation I see from something like even Sea of Thieves to an extent. So that's always been my biggest fear with the game. And hey, maybe they don't need to have a role. Who cares? It's not necessary. But it's about ironing out that specific detail of what do I need in my ship? Why do I want to put all my eggs in this basket? How strong is this basket? And why do I want to put them all in there instead of grabbing each individual ship with the amount of manpower I have available? And that's something that they're only going to do if they fully understand how people play the game. Not this game, but games in general, and take a good hard look at it and go, yeah, but who's going to do that? And if the answer is, oh, I'm sure somebody on Reddit will, or something like that, that's not a good answer. You have to look at what your average player who wants to win is going to do, not your tourist, not some guy who comes into SC and is wowed by the fidelity and all that, but no, the person who plays the game and plays the game to win. What are they going to do? And if they're not going to use those seats, then let's say, okay, well, can we give them a reason to? And if not, then you have to come up with another solution. Because in the games, even with the Polaris, people are talking about, if the Polaris came out right now with the current way the game plays at this very moment, even though it's a capital, that thing would just get swarmed down by Infernos. That thing would get swarmed down by Retaliator. There's nothing that it could do that would be more powerful with the game's current state and current design that would make that thing worthwhile. And I guarantee you, if I'm the kind of player who just wants to win and not experience being on a Polaris or whatever the heck it is that these LARPers do, I'm going to grab as many pipe hitters as I got. I'm going to throw them in the most effective anti-capital ships that I have, and I'm going to swarm that Polaris, and I'm going to blow it up. And I'm going to laugh at them. I'm going to laugh at them for spending all that money, and I'm not going to care because I just won. And if I lose a few ships in the process, who cares? Nobody cares about losing 3 or 4 Infernos. As long as you blow up the Polaris, who cares? And that's how players are going to look at this. And as every ship scales up, let's say the Polaris is no longer the big dog. Let's say the Javelin's the big dog. I'm just going to spam Polarises at the Javelin because under the current game's current rules, the pilot controls the torpedoes, and that's what the Polaris is for. So instead of putting those gunners in there, I'm just going to get as many Polarises as possible. I'm going to launch as many torpedoes as possible. And for anybody who goes, oh, people aren't going to do that. That costs a lot of real-life money. Or they're going to go, oh, that costs a lot of AUEC. Come on. People are going to do it. They always find a way. They always find a way. When it comes to winning, players will always find a way to do it. And those are going to be, do you really want your control of your game and your universe and your economy and your gameplay, if it ever comes out, if it's ever a real thing, do you really want that just being controlled by players who are just going to min-max the system? Because they'll find a way to do it. Doesn't sound like a good game. Not at all.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with all of that. And yeah, these ships really do look like they're two separate concepts. And most of these ships, it seems like they're designed for two different things, where the main thing they're designed for is to look good, be sold, and look like they would be a realistic thing to be in. And then whatever gameplay value they have is completely a secondary thought, if thought of at all. And yeah, people are going to they're going to min-max everything. And yeah, things like the Eclipse and the Infernos, they're kind of a problem because they're designed to be a soft, cheap counter to something that is much more expensive and much bigger that can't really do much of anything about it and against it. And it's a very difficult thing, but I think the classes of ships really just need to be defined differently. Where I think they need to be harder counters. Where like if you're an Inferno and you see a Gladius, you should realize you got a big problem. Like, you're gonna be toast. And if you're in a Gladius and you see a Polaris, like you're just gonna leave it alone because you can't possibly kill it. You don't have the firepower. You don't have the DPS to kill something like that. And I think EVE Online is a pretty good example of this, where you have big capital ships. I mean, they're piloted by one person as opposed to, a crew, but the concept is basically the same. You got a big, expensive, strong ship. It takes a lot of smaller ships to bring them down. And people go hunting for capital ships all the time, and they usually don't engage other capital ships with them. A lot of times they're killed with, little small destroyers or stealth bombers that fly in and just overwhelm it with firepower, massive firepower. But those ships get blown up so easily by like anything else. Like a strong fart will blow up those ships, and that's fine. They'll lose like 60 ships, but they'll kill the capital ship, and they'll still be orders of magnitude, positive on their, loss ratio of monetary value. And I think that's a similar kind of concept that needs to happen with Star Citizen. Is like, having three, like a single Eclipse should not take out a Hammerhead. Like should not have enough firepower. An Inferno probably doesn't have a magazine to kill, a ship like that. And it's going to feel weird if you're trying to make missions where you're killing these bigger ships, but make those missions worth a lot more and make them require multi-crew. Like, they don't have to be soloable. Why are they? Like, they shouldn't be. In my opinion, they shouldn't be. And they should be something that rewards in the game the multi-crew gameplay and get you out there doing it, rather than just being able to solo the content in, whatever ships you have.
No, I don't think there's much more to be said. We've been talking for over an hour. I think we've pretty much nailed most of the multi-crew concepts. And to kind of wrap this all up, I think multi-crew is going to be a thing. It has to be a thing at this point. But I'm not so sure it's going to be a good thing when it first comes out. And until I start seeing some actual discussion, some actual changes, and some, quite frankly, viability from these bigger ships, I'm not holding my breath for any sort of multi-crew at all. And that's a shame. But I think it'll get there. It'll just take time. So, Malorn, thank you once again for showing up, and thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you when we see you. Bye-bye.